I've never been the adventurous type. Not in the thrill-seeking sense, anyway. I like my routines. A good breakfast, a job I can do well, and a wife who knows how I take my coffee. That was my life. Simple. Steady. Predictable in the best possible way. But then came the expedition. It wasn't some wild idea I cooked up on my own. The company I work for, an outdoor gear brand based out of Colorado, wanted a few of us to go on a high-profile hike and test some of the new equipment. They said it would make for great marketing, real employees, real conditions, real gear. My manager, Dale, practically begged me to go. "You're dependable," he said. "Not flashy, not reckless. People trust a guy like you." So I agreed. I didn't even ask for a raise. My wife, Madison, was all in when I told her. Her eyes lit up, and she threw her arms around my neck like I'd just told her we won the lottery. "I've always wanted to see the Rockies with you," she said, that smile of hers stretching wide. "And besides, we could use the change of scenery." She wasn't wrong. We'd been dragging through the same old arguments lately, about her working too late, about me being too boring, about the distance growing between us. Maybe the mountains could shake something loose. So 2 weeks later, we boarded a flight to Denver. I packed practical stuff, wool socks, protein bars, field maps. Madison packed her DSLR, a bottle of red wine she snuck into her hiking pack, and a thin journal she always carried but never wrote in. There were 6 of us on the trip: me, Madison, Dale, my manager, Jess from accounting, a quiet guy named Marco who did logistics, and Troy, my coworker from product design. Troy was the type of guy people naturally liked. Tanned skin, shaggy blonde hair, big energy. Everything I wasn't. He slapped me on the back the moment we all met up at base camp. "Man, I can't believe you finally said yes to one of these," he said, grinning like we were best friends. "You, climbing a mountain? What's next, beer pong at company retreats?" I laughed along, not because I found it funny, but because that's what people like me do. The first few days were fine. Beautiful, even. I had never seen skies so wide or stars so bright. The wind up there had a voice, like it was telling stories only the rocks remembered. Madison seemed lighter, happier. She laughed at Troy's jokes and snapped hundreds of photos, of birds, clouds, and Troy when he wasn't looking. I tried not to overthink that last part. I chalked it up to her being in her element. She always had a little wild in her, and the city had caged that part of her for too long. By the 5th day, we were deep into the woods, far from cell service, far from other people, and apparently, far from the version of reality I thought we were all sharing. That was the day it happened, or at least, the day I found out. The plan was to split into 2 groups and scout separate trails for gear testing. I was paired with Jess and Marco, while Madison and Troy headed east with Dale. It didn't strike me as strange at the time. We were all co-workers. This was just business. We agreed to meet back at the main camp by sundown. But they came back late. Only Madison and Troy. Dale had twisted his ankle and stayed behind with a radio. Madison explained it all breathlessly, brushing pine needles out of her hair, her cheeks flushed and her smile wide. "God, that trail was amazing," she said, almost singing it. "We even found a little waterfall." Troy chimed in, tossing down his pack. "Totally worth it, man. We took some killer photos." I nodded and smiled like a good husband. But something didn't sit right. Maybe it was the way she kept tucking her hair behind her ear while looking at him, or how they seemed to speak in shorthand all of a sudden. It was probably nothing. I told myself that. But later that night, when everyone was asleep, I woke up thirsty. I crawled out of my tent and headed for the gear crate where we kept the water filter. That's when I saw them. Troy and Madison, sitting close by the edge of the trees, whispering. Her hand on his knee. his fingers brushing hers. And then the kiss. It was quick. Like a spark. But I felt it burn all the way through me. They didn't see me. I stood there in the dark for what felt like a lifetime, my heart punching my ribs like it wanted out. I could have stormed over. I could have yelled or thrown something. But I didn't. I just turned around, crawled back into my tent, and stared at the ceiling of nylon until the sun came up. I didn't sleep a wink. I spent the next day pretending everything was fine. That's what people like me do, we don't cause scenes. We don't throw punches. We bottle it all up, screw the cap on tight, and smile like we didn't just watch our wife kiss someone else under a canopy of pines and stars. The sun rose pale and cold, and I was already packed by the time the rest of the group stirred. Madison crawled out of the tent we'd been sharing, stretching her arms up toward the sky like nothing had changed. Maybe for her, nothing had. "Did you sleep okay?" she asked, brushing a speck of dirt off my shoulder like she still had that right. "Like a rock," I lied. We hiked northeast that day, into higher elevation. The climb grew steeper and the air thinner, and I welcomed the physical discomfort. It gave my mind something else to fixate on. Each step was a distraction. Each mile between me and that moment last night felt like distance from a truth I didn't want to face. Troy walked ahead, cracking jokes with Dale, whistling now and then like this was some damn vacation. He didn't even glance back at me, not once. If he felt guilty, he didn't show it. That stung more than I expected. Madison stuck close to me, though. Too close. She held my arm when we crossed a narrow log bridge, snapped pictures of the two of us with the GoPro, even kissed my cheek at one point. The worst part? I let her. I kept playing the part of the good husband because that's who I'd always been. Stable. Steady. The guy who'd never dream of cheating. The guy who'd never walk away. But something inside me was beginning to fray. That evening, after camp was set up, we all sat around a fire and shared one of those prepackaged backpacker meals, beef stew with too much salt. It tasted like nothing. Like cardboard soaked in guilt. The flames flickered shadows on everyone's faces, and Madison leaned her head against my shoulder like we were still in love. Troy glanced over just once. I caught it. A flicker of recognition. Like he knew what I knew, and didn't know what to do with it. "You okay, man?" he asked me, casual. Too casual. "Yeah," I said, chewing slow. "Just tired." The conversation drifted to other things, gear reviews, the company's next line of tents, Marco's weird obsession with fire-starting techniques. I barely listened. My eyes kept wandering to Madison's fingers, still wrapped around mine like a promise she'd already broken. Later, when everyone retreated to their tents, I lay awake beside her. I stared up at the nylon dome above us, replaying everything in my head. I should have said something. Demanded answers. Made her squirm. But instead, I whispered, "You seemed really happy yesterday." She didn't answer right away. Just shifted slightly, maybe trying to figure out if I meant something by it. "Yeah," she finally said, her voice soft. "It was a good day. A good day." The phrase hung there like a bad smell. I turned my back to her and pretended to fall asleep, but my eyes stayed open, locked on the silent dark. This wasn't just some dumb mistake on a drunk night at a party. This was something else. Something that had been growing for a while, maybe even before the expedition. I just hadn't wanted to see it. The next morning, we broke camp and pushed farther east. The terrain was rougher now, rockier, colder. Snow started to pepper the edges of the trail. Conversation died down, and everyone grew quieter, more focused. The moon lit up the trees like a secret. Everything looked silver and blue. Cold. Clean. If you didn't know better, you'd think this was a peaceful night. But I knew better. I followed at a distance, careful with my steps. Madison moved quickly and quietly, like someone who'd done this before. She didn't even look back. Maybe she didn't think she had to. She cut through a patch of fir trees and out into a clearing, a flat spot of moss and rock with a small pile of firewood from earlier in the day. That's where Troy was. He was sitting on a fallen log, poking at the ashes of a dead fire with a stick. She sat beside him without a word. No hugs. No kisses. Just silence and proximity. I stayed behind a tree, hidden, my breath fogging up in the cold. I couldn't hear much, but I didn't need to. Their body language told me everything I didn't want to know. They weren't fumbling with each other like some careless affair. This wasn't reckless. It was quiet. Familiar. Like something that had been going on for longer than just this trip. Madison finally spoke. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. Troy dropped the stick. I know. I hate this too. She sighed and leaned her head on his shoulder, and my chest tightened. I feel like a terrible person, she whispered. You're not, he said. You're just stuck. I couldn't listen anymore. I backed away, careful not to step on twigs or rustle branches. I made it halfway to camp before I had to stop and sit on a rock. My knees felt like rubber. My hands were shaking. They'd been talking like this for a while. They had feelings, real ones. This wasn't just a heat-of-the-moment thing. This was an affair with roots. And the crazy part? I wasn't even angry. I mean, should have been. I should have marched into that clearing and said something loud and unforgivable. I should have told them both to go to hell. But I didn't. I sat there in the cold, numb, and asked myself a question I wasn't ready to answer. Why am I still here? When I finally made it back to camp, Madison was already curled up in our tent. She didn't say a word as I slid into my sleeping bag. Just reached out, tucked her hand around my wrist like a child clinging to something safe. And again, I let her. The next day, no one said much. We were tired. Or at least pretending to be. Madison was quiet. She kept looking at me, like she was waiting for me to bring it up. But I didn't. Not yet. Troy was different, too. He hung toward the back, didn't say much to anyone. He barely looked in Madison's direction. The tension sat between us like another pack we all had to carry. Later, during a break near a frozen stream, Dale pulled me aside. Everything okay? He asked, his voice low. I nodded too fast. Yeah. Just sore. He gave me a look. The kind older guys give when they know you're full of it but they don't want to press. You've been quiet. I gave a half smile. So has the whole group. Dale shrugged and wandered off to check the gear. By the time we made camp again, I'd made up my mind. If Madison wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd give her the chance. So when we lay down in the tent that night, and she rolled over to face me, I didn't fake a smile. I didn't pretend to be asleep. I looked her in the eye and asked the question as steady and quiet as I could manage. How long has it been going on? Her breath caught. I could see it in the dark, the way her chest froze up like I'd fired a bullet. I don't know what you mean, she said. Don't, I replied, my voice flat. Please don't lie. Not tonight. She turned away from me, buried her face in the sleeping bag, but her voice still came out, muffled and low. A few months. I swallowed hard. Before this trip? Yes. Did you plan this? I asked. Bringing me here with him? No, she said quickly. I didn't plan anything. I thought it was over. But it's not. She didn't answer that. And that silence said everything. We lay like that for a long time, facing opposite directions. Not touching. Not sleeping. Just, existing in the same small space, miles from the rest of the world, but further apart than we'd ever been. At some point in the night, I whispered, "Do you still love me?" Her answer came slow. "I don't know. That one hurt the worst. But I didn't leave. I didn't rage or cry or pack up my things and hike out of there alone. I stayed. And I hated myself for it. At one point, I hung back while the rest of the group pushed ahead. I stood on a ridge, staring down at the valley below, so green it almost looked fake. The wind whipped around my ears, and I thought, just for a second, about what it would feel like to let go of everything. The marriage. The job. The person I thought I was. But I didn't. I adjusted my pack, tightened the straps, and kept walking. Because that's what people like me do. We don't make big dramatic exits. We endure. By the time we reached the next rest point, my legs ached, my hands were numb, and my heart felt like it had been chewed up and spit out. That night, while the others slept, Madison slipped out of the tent. I waited 10 minutes, then followed her. I didn't make a sound as I stepped out onto the cold dirt. I already knew where she was going. And this time, I didn't turn away. We broke camp in silence. No one said it, but we all felt it. Something had shifted overnight, like a thread pulled too tight had finally snapped, and now we were just trying not to notice the unraveling. Madison wouldn't look at me that morning. She packed her things with quick, sharp movements, like she was angry, but I couldn't tell if it was at me or at herself. Probably both. Troy avoided us altogether. He hiked ahead with Dale and Jess, moving fast, like maybe if he walked far enough, he could leave all of this behind. But I stayed close to the back, letting Madison drift somewhere in the middle. I didn't want to walk beside her, and she didn't ask me to. I think we both needed the space. The trail twisted around the base of a craggy hill, and every so often, the wind would rush down the rocks and steal my breath. But that cold didn't come close to what I felt inside. That was the kind of cold you can't layer up against. As I walked, I kept thinking about what she'd said the night before. "I don't know if I love you." Those words kept echoing like footsteps in a tunnel. Every time they came back, they felt heavier. But here's the part that doesn't make sense, not even to me. I still loved her. Even after everything. Even knowing what I knew. Even after catching her with Troy, hearing her say she wasn't sure how she felt about me. I still loved her. I didn't know if that made me loyal, or pathetic. That night, we made camp near a frozen lake. The wind had picked up, and the temperature was dropping fast, so we built the fire bigger than usual. Everyone huddled around it, saying as little as possible. Nobody was laughing anymore. Even Troy kept to himself, staring into the flames like he was trying to burn a memory. Eventually, Jess turned in, and Marco followed. Dale stayed up a little longer, flipping through a trail map, then grunted something about frostbite and wandered off to his tent. That left the three of us, me, Madison, and Troy. It was the first time since I'd caught them that we'd all been in the same space, without any distractions. I waited. Neither of them said a word. Madison finally stood. "I'm going to bed." She hesitated like she was about to say something more, then didn't. She just turned and disappeared into the dark. Troy stayed seated. He didn't look at me. Just tossed another stick into the fire. "I didn't plan for any of this," he muttered, barely loud enough to hear. I didn't respond. "I never meant for it to go that far," he added. I turned toward him slowly, my voice low and flat. "You kissed my wife, Troy." He nodded, eyes still locked on the fire. "Yeah. I did. You didn't trip into that." He gave a humorless laugh. "No. I didn't." Silence again. Then I asked, "Do you love her?" His jaw tensed. He didn't answer right away. I don't know, he said eventually. I think I wanted to. I think we both wanted something we weren't getting. And you thought you were the solution? He finally turned to look at me. There was no smugness in his face, no arrogance. Just tired regret. No, he said. I think I was just the nearest escape hatch. I stood and walked off before I said something I couldn't take back. Back at our tent, Madison was curled up in her sleeping bag, eyes open. Waiting. You talked to him, she whispered. Yeah. She nodded slowly, like that hurt a little more than she expected. Did he tell you it didn't mean anything? No. He said it meant something. Just not what either of you thought. She didn't respond. I lay down beside her, facing away. I asked you if you still loved me, I said after a long pause. You said you didn't know. I remember, she said quietly. Well, I know. I still love you. The silence after that felt like a cliff. Eventually, she said, why? That stopped me. Not how do you still love me, but why? I thought about it for a long time. I guess, because I still believe there's a version of us worth saving. She didn't say anything after that. Just reached out and touched my arm, barely. We slept like strangers sharing a tent that night. Close enough to feel each other's breath, but worlds apart. The next day, it snowed. It started light, soft flakes drifting lazily through the trees. But by mid-afternoon, the sky turned heavy and gray, and the trail disappeared beneath a blanket of white. We had to move slower, watch our steps, keep close together. It was the kind of weather that demanded teamwork. You had to look out for the person in front of you. You had to trust the one behind you not to let you slip. Funny how nature sometimes forces us to be what we can't be on our own. At one point, Madison slipped coming down a slope. I saw it happen, her foot catching on ice, her body tipping. And without thinking, I dropped my poles and caught her. My arms wrapped around her waist like they used to. Like muscle memory. Like I never stopped. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in days. And for the first time, she looked like she didn't know what she was doing anymore. Thanks, she whispered. I nodded, my hands still on her. And then, because I couldn't help it, I whispered back, you can fall. Just don't keep falling away from me. She didn't answer, but she didn't pull away either. And for now, that was enough. By the time we made it to base camp, the snow was knee-deep and our boots were soaked through. No one talked much. Not because there was nothing to say, but because too much had already been said in the silences between us. Sometimes it's not the words that break you, it's everything people don't say. We'd hiked 24 miles since the night I caught Madison in that clearing with Troy. 24 miles of shared meals, forced teamwork, sideways glances, and aching silence. You learn a lot about people when you're cold, hungry, and stuck with them. You learn even more about yourself. Base camp was a weather-beaten outpost near the edge of a frozen lake. It was mostly a wooden shed with 2 bunks, an old propane stove, and a metal roof that creaked under snow. Dale had arranged for a snowmobile drop the next morning to haul us out. No one had the energy to celebrate. Everyone just wanted it to be over. That night, we lit a fire in the stove and sat shoulder to shoulder in the warmth, thawing out but not relaxing. Jess was busy taking inventory, and Marco sat writing in his notebook. Troy kept to one side of the room, flipping through his trail notes, avoiding eye contact like it owed him money. Madison sat next to me. Not close like before, but not far either. I think we were both waiting, like one of us might say something brave and impossible. But neither of us did. Not then. It was Dale who finally broke the silence. This was one of the toughest trips I've ever led, he said, running a hand through his silver hair. Not because of the weather. Not because of the trail. Because of the weight. Jess looked up. The weight? He nodded. Everyone brought something heavy with them this time. You can feel it. It's in the way people don't laugh. The way they look over their shoulders like they left something behind. No one said anything. Then Dale added, whatever you brought out here, don't take it back with you. The room was quiet for a while after that. Later that night, I stepped outside alone. The sky was so clear it looked painted. Stars everywhere, and the wind had finally died down. I walked out onto the frozen lake, boots crunching over snow, and just stood there with my hands in my pockets, letting the cold do its work. That's when I heard the crunch of footsteps behind me. Madison. She walked up beside me without a word and stood there too. Her hood was up, her face pale in the moonlight. You remember our first hike together? She asked. Yeah, I said. Smoky Mountains. You hated your boots. She smiled faintly. They gave me blisters for 3 days. And you blamed me because I picked the trail. I blamed you for a lot of things back then, she said. You didn't deserve most of them. I shrugged. Some of them I did. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, I don't know why I did what I did with Troy. I nodded, not taking my eyes off the horizon. I think you do. You just don't want to admit it. She exhaled slowly, like the truth hurt coming out. I was lonely, she said. Even with you. I felt like I disappeared somewhere along the way, and he noticed me. Those words stung. But they didn't surprise me. I never stopped noticing you, I said. But I guess I stopped showing it. We stood in the quiet for a long time. Then she said, you still love me? I haven't stopped. She turned to look at me. Even after all this? I met her eyes. Even now. She didn't cry. Madison never really cried, not in the way that most people do. But her lips trembled just a little, and she reached out and took my hand. It didn't fix everything. That one gesture. It didn't erase the nights she left our tent or the way Troy looked at her or how far apart we drifted. But it was a start. Back in the shed, everyone was settling in for the night. Troy stood at the back, rolling up his sleeping pad. He didn't even look surprised when we walked in together. He just gave a small nod. Guess I'll sleep outside. You don't have to, I said, surprising even myself. Troy blinked. You sure? No, I said. But I'm trying. He gave me a look that was hard to read. Gratitude? Shame? Maybe both. That night, for the first time in days, Madison and I slept close. Not like everything was okay, but like we remembered how to feel safe beside each other. In the morning, the snowmobiles came. Big, loud, gas-belching monsters with trailers on the back. They took us out of that frozen world and back into the noise and mess of real life. When we got to the outpost lodge, people scattered, showers, real food, cell service. Troy left first. He didn't say goodbye. I didn't blame him. As Madison and I stood waiting for our shuttle to the airport, she turned to me and said, "So what now?" I thought about that. About what we'd been. What we'd lost. What we still might have. We go home, I said. And then we figure it out. She nodded slowly. I want to try. I really do. So do I. And for the first time since that night under the stars, I actually believed it. We still had a long way to go. But for the first time, we were walking in the same direction. We got home on a Tuesday. The house smelled like dust and stale air when we walked in. The thermostat had been left on low, so the place was cold, colder than I remembered it ever being, even with the heater running. It felt like the house had gone into hibernation while we were away. Like it wasn't sure if we'd be coming back. Madison dropped her bag by the front door and stood there, looking around the living room like she was trying to remember if it had always felt this small. "It's weird," she said finally. "Nothing changed, but everything feels different." I nodded. "That's kind of the theme lately." She didn't smile. Just gave a tired sigh and walked toward the kitchen. I heard the familiar clatter of the kettle being filled. Even after everything, some habits stayed the same. I stood in the living room a while longer, staring at the dent in the wall where the doorknob had once slammed too hard, the faded coffee stain under the couch, the scuffed corner of the baseboard I never got around to fixing. We'd built a whole life in this place, measured not in milestones, but in these little imperfections. And now, I wasn't sure what parts of that life were still real. We didn't talk much that first night. We sat at opposite ends of the couch, each nursing a mug of tea, the TV playing something neither of us paid attention to. I kept glancing over at her, wondering if she still felt like my wife, or if we were just two people trying not to fall apart. Sleep didn't come easy. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic breaths beside me, wondering how many nights I'd lost her without even knowing it. Wondering how many times she'd turned her back to me in the dark and cried, quietly, where I couldn't hear. The next morning, I made breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, bacon, same as I always used to. Madison came downstairs wearing one of my old flannels. That used to be my favorite sight in the world. I didn't know how to feel about it now. Part of me wanted to pretend we were okay again. Another part of me knew pretending is what got us here in the first place. "You didn't have to cook," she said. "I know," I said. "I wanted to." We ate quietly. A few words here and there about the trip, the snowmobiles, the way Dale snored like a diesel truck. But nothing deep. Nothing that mattered. Later that afternoon, I went back to work. Walking into the office was strange. The fluorescent lights buzzed the same, the cheap carpet still held that weird coffee smell, and the break room microwave still had that burn mark inside it, but everything else felt off. Troy wasn't there. Word was he'd taken a leave of absence, said he needed time to clear his head. I didn't ask questions. No one asked me any, either. But I noticed the way a few coworkers looked at me a little too long. News had a way of getting around, especially the kind you never want repeated. That week blurred by. I buried myself in emails, reports, routine. The quiet kind of busy that makes you feel like you're doing something useful, even if you're just hiding from yourself. Every evening, Madison and I came home to the same house, sat on the same couch, ate dinner at the same table. But it was like we were learning how to live with each other all over again. Every sentence was measured. Every gesture felt like it came with a question mark. One night, we were folding laundry, and she turned to me with a strange expression. "You know what I keep thinking about?" she asked. "What?" "That time we camped near Yellowstone, and it rained for 2 straight days. We were soaked, freezing, miserable, but you made me laugh." I smiled a little. "You mean when the tent collapsed at 3 in the morning and we found out raccoons had stolen our snacks?" She nodded. "That trip was a disaster. But I never felt closer to you than I did then." I sat down on the edge of the bed. "Yeah. I remember that night." She folded one of my shirts and placed it gently in the drawer. "I miss us." I looked at her for a long moment. "So do I." And then she said it, finally, after everything. "I'm sorry. I didn't say anything right away. I just let the words sit there between us, soaking into the walls like they belonged. I was selfish," she continued. "I blamed you for things I never had the courage to talk about. I thought if someone else noticed me, maybe it would fill the hole I didn't understand." I nodded slowly. "I should have noticed it, too." We didn't hug. We didn't fall into each other's arms like a movie ending. We just stood there, two people with their faults laid bare, trying to find a way back. The next few weeks were better. Not perfect, but better. We started going on walks in the evenings. Talking more. Laughing sometimes. I saw glimpses of the woman I married, the one who used to hum while making coffee, who wore socks that never matched, who'd curl up next to me during thunder. We even went hiking again. Just a short trail, nothing fancy. But it was enough to remind us that the trail ahead only matters if you're walking it together. There were still moments when I'd catch her staring off like she was somewhere else, and I'd wonder if she was remembering him, or remembering us before him. And there were nights when I'd lie awake, wondering if I'd made a mistake staying. But every morning, she was there beside me. And every morning, we chose each other again. Sometimes love isn't about the grand gestures. Sometimes it's just about staying, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. The first time we went back to the trailhead, it was Madison's idea. She'd been quiet all week, not in the cold shoulder kind of way, but in that introspective way she gets when her mind is busy sorting through things. I caught her standing at the back door one morning, staring out at the trees beyond our yard like she expected someone to step out of them. When I asked her what she was thinking, she just said, "I think we should go back." Back? I asked, confused. To the trail. The one we came out of. From the expedition. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't sure what going back would mean for us. I still had the image of her and Troy etched into my mind like a scar. That snowy clearing. The silence that followed. But I also remembered what Dale said back at the shed, "Whatever you brought out here, don't take it back with you." Maybe he was right. Maybe we had brought it back with us after all. So that weekend, we packed 2-day packs, loaded the car, and drove back toward the foothills. The roads were clear now. No snow. Just dry winter brush and a bright blue sky. The kind of weather that tricks you into believing spring's closer than it is. Neither of us talked much on the drive. But when we reached the trailhead, Madison looked over at me and said, "Thank you." I nodded. "We'll take it slow." We didn't go far, just 3 miles in. Just enough to get back to the place where things had cracked. We stopped by a small stream, the same one we passed on the way to base camp weeks earlier. It looked different now. Smaller. Gentler. We sat on a fallen log, drinking from our water bottles and staring at the icy current. "I was scared," she said softly. I looked at her. "Back then?" "No. Just now. On the way here." She looked down at her hands. "I was scared this would bring it all back, the worst parts." I let that settle. Then I said, "I think it does, but maybe that's okay." She glanced at me. "How?" "Because if we keep pretending none of it happened, we're just building something on top of rot. But if we face it, maybe we build something better." She smiled a little. "You always were better at saying the hard stuff. I had to learn the hard way." We sat there for a long time. Watching the water. Listening to the forest breathe. Then she did something I didn't expect. She pulled out a small notebook from her pack and handed it to me. "What's this?" "I started writing," she said. "After we got back. Just thoughts. Feelings. Letters I never gave you. I don't know. I figured if I couldn't talk, maybe I could write." I opened the notebook slowly, cautiously, like it might burn. Inside were a few messy pages of ink, tear marks, a drawing of a pine tree. And words. Real, raw words. She wrote about the loneliness. The guilt. The confusion. She wrote about how she never stopped loving me, even when she wasn't sure she liked herself. She wrote about Troy, how it wasn't love, not really, just an escape hatch in a storm she didn't know how to weather. And she wrote about me. About how she'd taken me for granted. How I made her feel safe when she didn't realize she needed it. How the moment she saw me standing in that clearing, she knew something inside her had broken, and not just between us, but within herself. When I closed the notebook, she looked afraid. Like maybe I'd just found her secret map and I'd throw it into the fire. But I didn't. I placed it gently back into her hands. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" "For trusting me with this. For not pretending." That night, back home, we ate grilled cheese sandwiches for dinner and shared a beer on the porch. The stars were faint, but they were there. And for the first time since we'd come home, she leaned her head against my shoulder and whispered, "I love you," without sounding unsure. I didn't say it back because I felt obligated. I said it back because I meant it. There were still shadows in the corners. Still questions we hadn't answered. But the silence between us had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was soft. Like breath. Like beginning again. You don't just fix betrayal overnight. It lives with you. It changes the shape of everything. But it doesn't have to define everything, if both people are willing to sit in the discomfort long enough to understand it. Some nights, I still think about Troy. Not with rage anymore. Not even jealousy. Just clarity. He didn't take anything from me. He just exposed what we'd been missing. And that hurt, but it also gave us a chance to see what we still had left. The hard part wasn't forgiving her. The hard part was choosing to keep loving her while she figured out how to forgive herself. And every day we stayed, every breakfast, every walk, every awkward silence, we laid down one more brick in something stronger than what came before. Not perfect. But honest. About 3 months had passed since the expedition. Some days, it felt like a dream, like I had imagined the whole mess up in my head. But then something would remind me, the old boots in the closet still covered in trail dust, the way Madison flinched at certain questions, the awkwardness between me and Dale when we crossed paths at work and pretended nothing had ever happened. Troy never came back to the office. His nameplate was gone, his desk cleaned out. No goodbye, no explanation, just a void where he used to sit and tell bad jokes over morning coffee. And to be honest, I didn't miss him. What surprised me more than anything was how normal things started to feel again. Not the old kind of normal, the kind where we moved through life half awake, taking each other for granted. No, this was something different. Sharper. More intentional. A new rhythm we had to learn from scratch. Madison was trying. She was more present now. Less distracted. She started painting again. Nothing fancy, just little canvases in the garage, abstract shapes and soft colors. Sometimes I'd stand in the doorway, watching her, and I'd think, I forgot what she looks like when she's lost in something she loves. And me? I guess I stopped waiting for the moment when everything would suddenly feel okay again. I stopped expecting a clean finish to something that would never really have one. Instead, I focused on the little wins. Like how we started making breakfast together on Sundays again. Or how she reached for my hand in the middle of the grocery store. Or how, one night while we were watching a dumb sitcom, she laughed so hard she snorted, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't hear the echo of someone else's name in my head. One night in early spring, she surprised me with a weekend trip to the coast. Just the two of us. No friends, no distractions. Just a small cottage by the ocean and a pile of books we'd probably never finish. I thought it might be good, she said when we got there. To start making new memories. I smiled. Yeah. I like the sound of that. We spent that first evening walking barefoot along the beach, the cold sand biting our heels. The sun dipped behind the horizon in slow motion, casting everything in gold. And for a moment, it was like none of the pain had ever happened. When we got back to the cottage, we sat on the porch with hot tea and listened to the waves. She leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we didn't come back from that trip?" I thought about that. Sometimes, I said. But I'm glad we did. Even with everything. She nodded. Me too. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small photo album. Inside were snapshots from over the years, camping trips, birthdays, messy living room forts on rainy Sundays. Us younger, thinner, happier. Or maybe just more naive. She flipped to the last page, and there was a new photo, one she'd taken just days earlier. Us in the kitchen, flour on our faces, laughing while trying to bake a pie we'd completely ruined. I want to start filling the rest of it again, she said. With this version of us. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Yeah, I said. Me too. Later that night, lying in bed with the window cracked open and the sound of the surf rolling in, she turned toward me and said something I didn't expect. I know it's not over. The hurt, I mean. I know it still sneaks up on you. Probably always will. She was right. Some nights I still replayed things I wished I hadn't seen. I still questioned myself, still wondered what signs I missed. I still woke up some mornings with a pit in my gut and no reason why. But I also knew something else now. I'd survived it. We'd survived it. I'm not trying to erase it, she said. I just want to make sure it doesn't own us. I reached over, brushing her hair behind her ear, and said the only thing that felt true. We've already taken that back. She smiled through tears. And that's when I realized that trust isn't some big moment of forgiveness or one-time choice. It's 1,000 small things, quietly done, over and over again. It's patience. Rebuilding. Leaving the door unlocked and hoping the person you love still walks through it, every day. I didn't stay because I was weak. I stayed because I believed in her more than I hated what happened. And because, deep down, I knew I wasn't perfect either. I'd failed her in ways I hadn't even realized until she broke. That doesn't excuse what she did. But it gave me enough understanding to try again. To keep trying. Because love like that? It's rare. And if you can hold on to it, even after the storm, it's worth every painful step back to the shore. It's been a year now. A full cycle of seasons since we came down from that mountain, since the day everything shifted. A year since I saw my wife with someone else and still somehow chose to stay. Sometimes, I think about how different that version of me was back then. The man who stood frozen in that snowy clearing, heart racing, not knowing what to say or feel. I think about how small and broken I felt. How I wanted to scream, or punch something, or disappear altogether. And then I think about now, how that same man sits in the garden on a warm spring morning, coffee in hand, watching his wife water the tomato plants, and knows he made the right choice. Not the easy one. Not the clean one. But the right one. We still have our rough days. The kind where old wounds itch and doubt knocks on the door like an unwelcome guest. But those days don't define us anymore. What defines us is what we built after the fire. Madison and I didn't go to therapy, though we talked about it. She started journaling more seriously, and I started listening more than I ever had. That might not sound like much, but trust me, it mattered. Sometimes, the biggest shifts come from the quietest changes. She confessed things in layers. Not just about Troy, but about herself. Her fears. Her restlessness. How she felt invisible sometimes, even before the affair. How she thought I stopped seeing her the way I used to. That part gutted me. Because I realized I had. Not intentionally, not cruelly, but I had let routine replace romance. I'd let comfort turn into complacency. I'd stopped looking at her the way I used to when we first fell in love, like she was the best thing I'd ever stumbled into. That doesn't excuse what she did. But it made me understand it. We started doing something we called check-ins. Once a week. No phones, no distractions. Just an hour to ask each other hard questions and answer them honestly. Are you happy? Do you feel seen? What do you need more of? What do you miss? Sometimes it brought laughter. Sometimes tears. But always truth. And truth, I've learned, is the only soil love can really grow in once the lies have burned everything else down. Work got better, too. Dale and I eventually had a beer and cleared the air. He didn't know what had happened between Troy and Madison until after the fact. He apologized, though he didn't have to. We both knew the kind of man Troy was: charming, manipulative, slippery. I didn't hate him anymore. He just didn't matter. And as for Madison, well, she came back to me in pieces. Little by little. And I met each piece with as much grace as I could muster. One evening, not long ago, we went back to that cabin we stayed at on the coast. The one she surprised me with during those early, shaky days of trying again. We stood on the same porch, cups of tea warming our hands, the same ocean humming just beyond the dunes. She looked at me and said, "You know what I realized this year?" "What's that?" "That love isn't something you feel every second. It's something you do. Every day. Even when it's hard." I nodded. "Especially when it's hard." She smiled. "Thanks for doing it with me." We didn't say much after that. We didn't need to. Somewhere along the way, the silence between us had turned into something sacred instead of something scary. A sign that we'd stopped surviving each other, and started living together again. Looking back now, I don't see the betrayal as the end of anything. I see it as the place where we finally started. The part of the road where we stripped away the pretend. Where we stopped being what we thought a marriage was supposed to be and started becoming something real. Flawed. Messy. Human. But real. If you'd asked me a year ago if I could ever forgive her, I would have said no. If you'd asked me a year ago if staying would make me weak, I might have believed you. But today, I know better. Staying wasn't weakness. It was courage. It was faith. It was love, not the fairy tale kind, but the kind that wakes up every morning and chooses the same person, even when it's hard, even when it hurts, even when part of you still remembers the cold sting of betrayal. Because that's the kind of love that lasts. And for a guy like me, just a regular man with a regular life, that's more than enough. So yeah. We're still here. Still healing. Still trying. Still home. And after everything? That's the happiest ending I could have asked for.